Thank you everyone for being here tonight and allowing us to share some information on a very important decision for citizens of Mesquite. My name is Cliff Kahili. I'm the city manager, and tonight is about providing information. And so we're going to run through our presentation. We'll have a video to show, provide as much information as we can. But I really encourage you to ask as many questions. We have staff members here who can answer questions about the budget, about the election, and we'll be here as long as y'all have questions. So don't be afraid to ask anything of us tonight. So, and the reason you're here, I assume, is because you've heard that we're having a tax election. And the primary focus of this election is for voters to consider keeping the tax rate the same as it is right now. And with that tax rate and with the budget that goes along with that, this will create more revenue so we can use for public safety, for streets and alley repairs, and then more security for our computer infrastructure and cities' networks. Hope everybody knows that November 2nd is Election Day, and that early voting starts on October 18th and runs through the 29th. We'll have some other information later on that shows information on how to vote. This will also be the same election that the City Council elections will be on, so the ballot will have this measure along with the City Council. And as I said before, our City Council has already passed a budget at this tax rate. And it was primarily for us to account for the growth that's coming to the city of Mesquite. We are a growing community. While we're almost the oldest community in Dallas County, we're also growing, probably the faster than most cities. And with that growth comes the need for more public safety, more efforts to repair the aging infrastructure that we have. And then one of the new threats that we have are the constant attacks that our computer networks receive from people wanting to impact our finances and also obtain data that we have in our systems, which includes taxpayer information like driver's license number, bank account numbers through our water billing system. A lot of vulnerabilities there. And we want to make sure that our citizens' information is protected. The budget that we approved is based on the current tax rate, which is 0.70862 of the $100 valuation. And what this does is this tax rate will increase the amount of revenue that the city collects next year if this measure were to pass. And that's a key in this, is it's about the revenue, not necessarily the rate. And the reason why we look at it that way is a few years ago, state legislature passed Senate Bill 2, which capped how much revenue a city could obtain through the tax rate without getting voter approval. And so that cap is at 3.5% above the previous year's revenue. And that's called the voter approved tax rate. So if we want to go above that 3.5, we must go to the voters and have an election. So the Proposition A, which is on the ballot, is on November 2nd, will allow Mesquite residents to vote for or against Proposition A, or vote for or against that 0.70862 tax rate. And the reason why the council considered this budget and was looking ahead was primarily for the growth that we're about to see. Our census numbers show that we're at 150,000 people. We're a big city, and we have a lot of growth ahead of us. And when we've surveyed residents, we do a survey about every other year of residents, and the priorities that keep coming back that are the most important to residents are streets and safety. 62% of residents in the last survey ranked public safety as one of their highest priorities. And 66% of the residents identified streets and street and alley repair as a very high priority. And so we have to anticipate how we're going to maintain the infrastructure, which is the streets and alleys, but also police a city that is growing new neighborhoods that'll continue for the next 10 to 20 years. So when we talk about public safety, and in this budget, it includes 5 additional police officers. And that number that number is something that's going to continue over the next few years. We want to be ahead of the need for officers on patrol. Currently, we have 248 police officers, and many of you may know that there is a charter requirement that we have a certain number of police officers per 1,000 residents. So currently, we're above that, but with the growth we're anticipating, we can very quickly get outpaced on that, and so we'll need to make sure that we are trying to stay ahead of that mandate. But it's also not just because there's a mandate, it's because we're, as a large city, we're over 40 square miles. That's a lot of distance to cover. And so if we want our police officers to be present and visible in our neighborhoods, because we need to have more police officers. And what we've found is police officers being visible in neighborhoods reduce crimes. We have several programs where we deploy officers into neighborhoods, and in hot spots, as we call them, where we've seen an increase in crime. And when we put the officers there and they're visible, we see that crime rate reduce dramatically. And so that's that concept that we want to make sure that we have officers visible in as many neighborhoods as possible. Currently, we have officers, about 12 officers patrolling during the day, and anywhere between 16 and 24 over the night shifts. So typically between 6 and midnight, we have 24 police officers on the street. And as you know, you've heard that crime is occurring all over the Metroplex, and criminals don't look at city limit lines. So we want to make sure that Mesquite is being as proactive on crime. And we also are facing, and what a lot of businesses are, and a lot of cities are, is a labor shortage. We have over 100 positions throughout the city that are vacant currently, including 13 police officer positions. And so we're in competition with all of these other cities in the Metroplex, and we want to make sure that our police officers' pay is competitive. And so we are trying to, with this budget, increase the minimum pay for a police officer so we can try to attract more really good officers to patrol our streets. We also talk in public safety about the fire department. And again, as a growing city, we need to make sure that we are expanding our fire department to make sure that our firefighters are not spread too thin and can respond to calls in an efficient manner. And so in the future, we're going to have to build another fire station. But right now, we want to shore up the firefighters that we have right now. And so this budget includes 10 new fire positions. And one of the primary objectives is we have 2 stations in which we have an apparatus that is only covered with 3 firefighters. National safety standards call for 4 firefighters per apparatus. And so what this means is sometimes that 3-person apparatus has to join another apparatus on a fire call. So with 4 firefighters on that apparatus, it can go by itself to a call, which allows us to spread out our fire response and reduce response times. So if a fire truck is answering a call on one side of their district, the fire engine can go to the other side of the district instead of having to wait for somebody from another station come into that area. Additionally, with this budget, we are including firefighters to man what's called a traffic attenuator. Basically, this is just a big roadblock. You've probably seen them in construction zones. Right now, when we have an accident on the freeway, if you can imagine on LBJ, we're having to use a nearly $1 million piece of fire equipment to protect the police officers and firefighters and the people who were involved in the accident. By staffing this attenuator to go out on those accidents, they can block and they can set up cones and barricades to protect that accident zone for the safety of our staff, but also the people in the accident, and also for the motorists who are driving around. Because as you know, people aren't slowing down when they see the red lights as much. And so we want to make sure that we're as visible as possible. So as many bright lights, as many cones as we can to make sure that motorists see us and can slow down if necessary. So in 2020, we responded to over 19,000 calls in fire. That's EMS and fires. And so our goal is to respond to those in 5 minutes. And so with this additional staffing and not having to dedicate a fire truck to go to an accident scene, that allows us to spread our resources out and meet the needs of the growing community without having to put an additional fire station in as quickly or as sooner than we need to. And again, also, same issue when it comes to labor. And this budget includes funding to increase the minimum salary of firefighters to help us continue to attract people who want to be firefighters in Mesquite. And right now, we're starting to see a drop in the number of people wanting to be firefighters. And so that being able to offer a competitive salary is going to be key in maintaining our staffing. And we all, as you drove here, I bet you probably hit about 2 or 3 potholes. And yeah. So there are several conditions that impact the lifespan of pavement. If you recall, we've been through a drought recently. In Texas, we have record 110-degree days. And then over the past 2 years, we've had exceptional rainfall. All 3 of those things impact our streets and alleys. And it has accelerated the condition of getting worse, the worsening conditions. And so you'll remember several years ago, we passed a street bond to take care of the worst streets. And that's a 10-year program to be out fixing these really bad streets. Well, what we don't want to do is neglect the streets that are maybe just starting to age and allow them to get into this really bad condition. So this budget includes funding of about $750,000 to go to just street repairs for residential streets that are not in the grade 4 residential street bond program. But it also impacts our alleys. We don't have a program right now that uses the bond fund, so we have to put these funds into fixing alleys, and we want to make sure we're staying up with our alleys because they're deteriorating just as fast. And it'll also allow us to put more money towards our thoroughfares where we see separation and potholes occurring as well. So it's just, I will tell you, the more money that we can put into streets, the more that we can keep up with the aging process. And these are funds just for repairs, not for new streets. And the last thing, and I mentioned earlier, was cybersecurity. The city has several platforms in which we operate our different departmental functions. Police and fire have a platform. Our finance department has a platform. Our code enforcement department has a platform. And all of these have certain information about people, addresses, all sorts of things that we don't want somebody getting a hold of and misusing. And so this budget includes $250,000 for a cybersecurity program, which is basically will be a private consultant that will monitor intrusions into our networks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We currently do this with in-house staff, and they get alerts, but the more frequent these attacks are occurring, it's harder for them to keep up, and we can't ask this small group of staff to work 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. With these funds, this private company will do that for us, and will work with us and identify not only when intrusions are happening, but they'll also identify potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and to create a really strong computer network. We're also included in the budget will also be an additional staff member that will monitor this program and supervise the contract. So a lot of people are concerned with the impact that the election will have on them. And looking at what the average single-family homeowner pays in taxes and the values, we're estimating that it's going to be a $10 a month increase in your taxes. Now, if you're over 65, you're eligible for the, and you filed the proper forms, you're eligible for a freeze on your taxes to where you freeze the value of your home at a certain date, and this does not impact you as a taxpayer. And what the difference is between what we would have with the election and without is about $3.9 million in additional funding for the city. And if the tax rate does not pass, if this election does not pass, then we would go back to the voter-approved tax rate, which is the tax rate that generates the same revenues from the previous year plus 3.5%, which would generate an additional $1.5 million in revenue. And that tax rate would be 0.6656. So before we get to questions, we're going to show a quick video, and then we'll wrap up and we'll answer questions. So,
City of Mesquite tax election. In recent community surveys, Mesquite residents expressed that public safety, streets, and infrastructure were their top priorities. 66% of citizens stated maintenance of city streets was a very high priority. 62% of citizens stated quality police and fire services was a high priority. Public safety and street maintenance were ranked by citizens as the biggest issues Mesquite will face in the next 5 years. Overview of the tax election. The Mesquite City Council unanimously approved the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, which keeps the city property tax rate the same as last year. The City of Mesquite's new budget includes additions for public safety, city streets, and cybersecurity. Additions include 15 new police and fire positions, more funding for street and alley maintenance, and better protection of electronic data. While the property tax rate will remain the same as last year, because of increased property values, the city will see increased revenues. This is how the city proposes to pay for these additional services. State law requires that Mesquite voters approve this year's tax rate, which exceeds the 3.5% voter approval tax rate. Proposition A. Approving the ad valorem tax rate of 0.70862 per $100 valuation in the City of Mesquite, Texas for the current year, a rate that is 0.04302 higher per $100 valuation than the voter approval tax rate of the City of Mesquite, Texas, for the purpose of increasing fire and police staffing levels and competitive pay for fire and police personnel, and increasing funding for alley and street maintenance. Last year, the ad valorem tax rate in the City of Mesquite, Texas was 0.70862 per $100 valuation. Proposition A will be on the November ballot for Mesquite voters to vote for or against the proposition. Early voting, October 18th through the 29th. Election Day, November 2nd. If Proposition A is approved by voters, how might this election impact residents and individuals over 65 years of age? If Proposition A is approved by voters, the average homeowner would pay about $10 more per month in city taxes based on the average property value in Mesquite. The tax rate would not impact property owners who have qualified for the age 65 or older homestead exemption with their property appraiser. How will the revenue generated from Proposition A be allocated? Proposition A will provide revenue for the approved budget. It allocates funds for 5 additional Mesquite police officer positions to increase neighborhood patrols, plus competitive pay increases for officers that serve the community. 10 additional Mesquite Fire Department positions, which will provide faster response times and increase public safety. $750,000 in additional funding for city streets and alley repairs. And funding to improve security from cyber attacks on city computers that have sensitive data and access to operations, as well as the public's personal information. For information on the tax election, voting dates, voting locations, and more, please visit cityofmesquite.com/2021 tax election.
So just to try to answer an expected question is, in addition to all of these things in our budget this year, we also have several other items that are included in the baseline budget. And that includes a health scan program for our fire and police officers. That's part of our cancer screening and health assessment to ensure that we're catching any issues with our firefighters and police officers early. We're also creating a safety program for the Peachtree area around the AMC and those restaurants. And that will include staffing for additional police officers localized in that area for specific hours and days of the week, just because of some of the things that have been happening in the past few years. This will be a regular program to enhance security in that area. We also included in this budget a student resource officer for the new Vanguard High School with MISD. And it also includes competitive pay for other positions in the city, some of our streets, solid waste, and utility workers as well. Again, making sure that we're able to attract and hire employees to do the work needed in the community. So on the screen are the election dates. Early voting is October 18th through the 29th. Election day is November 2nd. And if you have any questions on the election, if you need information, I'll answer your questions here in a second. We do have our website set up to address any frequently asked questions. And the more questions were asked, we'll add those to the frequently asked questions. So this is the point where we're here to answer your questions. I will remind everyone we are on video, several video cameras apparently. And so what we're going to ask is, if you do have a question, if you'll come up to the microphone so the people who are watching this when it's recorded or watching at Facebook Live can hear your question. So, but if you're not comfortable going to the microphone, we'll just repeat the question. So, I'm sorry. Sure. Yep.
I wanted to make a positive comment about the need for the alley repairs. The alley behind my house on Richmond Drive was replaced this year. It took them quite a while. They did a fantastic job with it, and it's nice to be able to drive down the road. I think that they should be, recognized for what they have done, because it was worth it.
Well, thank you very much.
I have a question. I noticed that you said it's 5 more police officers, and I believe you said it said 10 firefighters. Can you explain to maybe people who don't understand the difference in why you have to hire only 5 more officers and 10 more police officers? Because a lot of people don't understand that.
No, absolutely. The reasoning is just for just resource allocation. Because we're growing, we're going to be adding police officers for many years, and we feel that 5 at this time was within the budget, and also gets us to a certain point where we want to be as our population is growing. And we're trying to stay ahead of a population growth curve. So that 5 officers this year keeps us at that point. And then the firefighters are specific to 2 stations and those apparatus that we're placing them in, along with the additional attenuator program to help for firefighter safety. So. Oh.
Can you go over again the difference in the revenue
Sure.
and the rate? Because when we
Certainly.
read that, that looks
Yes.
real
Yeah,
confusing.
The state legislature required a certain language on the ballot, and if you don't read it clearly, it can be kind of confusing. It throws a bunch of numbers at you. So we're doing our best to be able to explain it, and that's one of the main reasons why we're here. So we are limited by what's called a voter-approved tax rate, and that's the rate that generates the same revenue from the previous budget year plus 3.5%. So that is that 0.665 tax rate number. That's what we can do without an election. The council adopted a budget that has the 0.7082 number, and that generates more revenue. And the difference in the revenues, just so I don't get them wrong. So without the election, we would generate $1.5 million in additional revenue. With the election, it generates an additional $5.4 million in revenue. Not, from what we had last year, total.
So the net's 3.1?
Yes, it's a difference of about $3 million.
But doing this will only increase like property tax like $10.
That's for the average single-family home in Mesquite, based on the value increase, it would be about a $10 per month. Yes, ma'am.
How would you know, or how, on the streets that y'all are gonna repair or to fix or maintain, and in the alleys, how do you know which ones y'all are gonna focus on?
We're going to do those based on, let me repeat the question. You asked how we're going to decide where those funds are spent. Those are going to go into our general maintenance fund. So those are based on observations of our street supervisors who drive the streets on a regular basis and on citizen input. So when if a pothole forms in an alley and a citizen calls it in, it goes into a list. And then the supervisor goes out there and determines what method to repair it and how quickly we need to do it. So sometimes we'll put just a asphalt overlay on it. It's not as bad, but we want to cover it versus the one that's going to, be very deep and possibly damage a car. We'll do what we call a full depth repair on those. So it'll vary on where we are and which ones we do.
So I can call and let them know we have one, we have several in our alley.
Yes.
And it looked like they put asphalt on it, but it has sunk again.
Yes, that's the problem with Texas soils is the reason these potholes are forming is because the base under the alley is deteriorated and washed out, so the concrete breaks on top of it. And unless you do a full depth repair, you're never going to fix it correctly. But a lot of times, we've got 100 on the list ahead of it, so we'll put some asphalt in there just to buy us some time. So that's, we could do a whole other town hall meeting on street repair. And I'm happy to explain it to anybody because it's not as easy as it looks because the full depth takes time, it blocks the alley, and it can be a nuisance if we're out there too long. So, but I appreciate the comments about, was it Richmond? Or what was your street?
Mine was Richmond.
Richmond, so thank you.
What determines whether you do, how bad does it have to be to determine if it's a, well, you already know where I'm going.
The question is, how do we determine which is a severe pothole versus one that's not? And really, that's just it's subjective to the supervisor that's out there. These guys been at it for 10 or 15 years. They know what's causing the problem and what method can fix it versus what can get us by. Go out there and do the ones that are really bad first, and then get to these before they get too bad. And sometimes we may patch something 2 or 3 times. Come on in, sure. We'll patch it 2 or 3 times before we can get to that full depth repair because of the cost and the time that's required.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Carla was patched in a spot. So
Yes.
thank you for that.
And sometimes we'll pass up a small pothole to get to the big one. And just because we're running, we repair potholes anytime there's good weather. And so when it rains, that puts us behind. Cold weather puts us behind.
So when new developments come in, who's paying for that nice work?
The developer pays for the new streets. So when your house was built, the person who was building the houses was required to put in all of the infrastructure. Yeah, unfortunately, they're not around 30 years later. But that's becomes the city, and that's why you pay taxes, is to maintain things like that. But I can assure you that we have learned a lot in the 30 and 40 years since a lot of houses were built, and the streets are a lot stronger, and they're constructed to last.
If I can ask, what would be the impact of the city over the next 4 or 5 years to our community if it doesn't pass? In other words, you don't get the additional 3.1 million out of this program. How's it going to impact us, and how far behind are we going to be in certain areas, including your police, fire, and roads?
Well, our priorities are always going to be public safety and streets. So what this means is that we'll continue to operate with the fire staffing that we have and continue the model that we have, and then response times could go up. We will continue to budget as we can. It'll just be a slower pace. So at some point, the new development will come in, and those values will create enough revenue in order for us to pay for these things. But those houses are not going to be built for 2 or 3 years, and the revenues are not going to be there for those 2 or 3 years. So that's what that time frame looks like. Anybody else want to ask questions on camera? So if not, we'll conclude the meeting here. But like I said earlier, staff will be around to answer your questions as long as y'all are willing to stay. So on behalf of the city of Mesquite, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Those who are watching, we encourage you to visit the website. There's a place to ask questions on the website. Contact the city staff. Contact my office if you have questions about the budget, the tax election, or just anything in general on how we do business in the city of Mesquite, because it's very important for our citizens to understand what's going on. It is your city. We are here to make it a better place for you, and we are always looking for ways to improve. So thank you for your time tonight, and we'll see you at the next one.